Hi folks, something a bit different this week. I'm actually in South Africa, visiting family, and I'm in a beautiful part of the country. It's actually sort of semi-arid, verging on desert, but there are some beautiful spots in this area. So I've just taken the opportunity to get out into the wilder areas, and I thought I'd just show you who are interested just what it looks like out here and how beautiful this place can be. Now, this particular area, they've just come out of almost 10 years of drought, and they've had good rains in the last few months, which is amazing because this area is actually starting to green up so quickly. And I'm in the sort of mountain range called the Swartberg, which is one of the long line of mountains that sort of fringe southern Africa. And you start off at the sea and you sweep up into these mountain ranges, and then beyond them you get down into the sort of very arid semi-desert areas. And so we're literally on that fringe, and I'm doing a hike today. We'll be looking at some of the scenery in the mountains in the Swartberg. I'll get up onto a ridge and we'll look down onto the Karoo, which is, as I said, a semi-desert now. A couple of years ago it literally was bone dry. It looked like there was not a single plant alive, and just after a few months of rain, not a lot of rain, but they've had some rainfall, and it's amazing how quickly things will green up. So anyway, we'll if you're interested in something a little bit different, then stick with me and we'll see what it looks like out here in Africa. So although these mountains are called the Swartberg, which means the Black Mountains, that's because from a distance they look very dark, but up close you can see all the reds in the rock, and I think that's due to iron content. But you can also see the layers that have been bent and twisted, and these are part of the Cape Folded mountain range that essentially, under a lot of pressure, these sedimentary layers were buckled and they formed these very interesting formations in the rock. So it definitely pays to stay hydrated in this environment. So I just crossed this little stream, taking the opportunity to have a drink and also fill my water bottle, and it should be ready for heading up the hills now. I'm not sure if you can make it out, but this is an example of where the layers of rock have been buckled. Well, I'm now about halfway up the climb. I made my way past that small cabin that you can see in the distance down there in the valley. Been making my way up this fairly rugged slope. But you can see the scenery here in amongst these mountains. They're fairly remote, well, not very inhabited at all. A lot of this is actually protected area, which is really good. But you may be able to pick out, as there's a good example of where the bush is actually greening up now after the drought I mentioned earlier. A couple of years ago this was literally just grey and brown. You can see there where some new growth is happening next to the bushes that have died. Anyway, so my next step is I'll be making my way up to the top of that ridge there. And I don't know if you can see those rocks with the green on. That actually is lichen. This is something a bit interesting that I spotted. It's the spur of a klipspringer, which is a small antelope which lives in these mountains. Really, they almost stand on toes, so they make these small peg marks. And you can see how it just moved and disturbed some stone. Now, interestingly, when I saw this, I saw some movement up on the slope above me, and you won't make it out with my phone, unfortunately, because it's not the best camera, but it was literally in the middle of this shot, halfway up that slope, watching me. It's moved off now, but that's where it was. Well, I'm halfway to where I saw the antelope, and you can see there now is very fresh droppings. So if you thought I hadn't actually spotted it, you can see that this is very fresh, probably done this morning. You can see the older droppings. They obviously use this space quite a bit. There's a lot of droppings here, so they obviously congregate on this spot quite often. But I've made it up into the top of the ridge now. That's looking sort of back towards the direction that I came. So this is that mountain range I was mentioning, and then it ends here and then extends out over this great plain that becomes the Great Karoo. So we're almost looking north there, and these plains extend hundreds of miles up into the interior of the country. And if you just carried on going from here, maybe a couple of thousand miles, you get into the Kalahari Desert. So this area is called the Great Karoo, which is semi-desert, quite an arid area, but it is greening up with all the rain. And you can see there are sort of river courses that have flowed out of these mountains, and they've created some green belts. Now it's quite interesting because most rivers in these mountains flow south to the sea, but in here the watershed, if they fall on the right side of the mountains, they flow north, and then they sort of peter out into the desert. But they do provide groundwater, and a lot of the farmers and villages in this desert area use boreholes to extract that water. So, you know, these mountains are sort of life-giving to this area. And you can just see one of these villages on the outskirts. So this is literally on the edge of the desert. They are only really sustained because of the water flowing out of this mountain. So they're able to grow things like olives and occasionally lucerne, but the bulk of this area is going to be sheep farming, big sort of sheep ranches, and they are wild game as well. A lot of people have converted to springbok, and obviously in these mountains you get a lot of kudu. So kudu and leopard are the two sort of main large mammals in this area, and then you've got a lot of small antelope and small mammals. I did hear some baboons just down the slope, so somewhere down there some baboons were calling, but I haven't spotted them yet. Well, I was traveling pretty light today, so I just brought this little haversack, which is the South African Army patrol bag that we issued when I did my national service. I'm not sure they still use these anymore, but that was the issue. So it's probably the South African equivalent of the Polish bread bag, but pretty useful small haversack for carrying, you know, just a day's worth of stuff. You know, you don't need to carry too much gear when you're out in this sort of hot environment. Obviously brought water bottle, and this is the old army issue, and also brought some binoculars, pretty handy for spotting, you know, game or anything else you might see in this environment in the mountains. It's good to be able to look far out. Something that struck me on the way up, you know, a lot of my videos are set in sort of Northern Europe and the UK, and there a lot of the time you spend is thinking about how to stay warm. You know, if you get stuck, how to make a fire, shelter, etc. It's totally different out here. Here, you know, the main thing you're going to be thinking about is water. You know, because hypothermia will kill you pretty quickly in the north, but here it's going to be something like heat stroke or dehydration. So, you know, the things you really need to keep on top of out here is staying hydrated. So it's just interesting how different environments require you to be aware of different essentials. Well, I haven't seen any recent fresh evidence of kudu. We obviously saw the klipspringer just now, but there's some droppings here, and you can see these smaller ones are most likely the klipspringer. And then alongside them, as I say, they're pretty old, but they're a lot larger. And there's a good chance that those are kudu dropping. But from a fair while back, you can see they're fairly sun-bleached by now. I'm doing a circular route today, following the ridge from where I've just had my water break, and then the trail sweeps down across this face below that ridge, and then follows down through that valley and sort of terminates at those buildings below. Well, once I get to that point, I'll head out onto the Karoo Plain and show you the difference in the sort of semi-desert vegetation compared to here in the mountains on the edge of the desert. So although these are very close to that area, they're high altitude, they do get a bit more rainfall. They're fairly dry still, but you know, just that little bit of extra moisture gives them a very different vegetation. Well, here we have a termite mound. You can see this fresh work that they're doing here. Must be to repair a damage of some sort. Termites are a good source of food for a lot of animals that live in these arid areas. I've just come across this termite mound that has been excavated by something, no doubt to get at the termites within and the termite grubs. But you can see how this one wasn't repaired and was left. Maybe they ate all the termites that were in it. But I believe the original settlers to this area often used to use these as sort of ovens. And you can see why. If you made a fire in there, baked the mud, you could actually cook some bread in there and things. It's almost like a purpose-built pizza oven. So there's quite a good view of the ridge that I've been following, and you can see the Karoo on the right and the mountains or the Swartberg on the left. A close-up of the Lycan I mentioned earlier. So this is once again a south-facing rock. So this Lycan obviously likes the southern aspect, probably because it's cooler. And I know up on this ridge they often do get quite a bit of mist. So presumably that's the conditions this Lycan likes. Just come across this millipede that obviously is dead and been eaten by these strange red bugs. Not sure what they are, but you know, that's just nature. So that's the klipspringers right there. I'm on the other side of the valley now from where I was earlier. That's the ridge that I was moving across. So I've swung right round and I'm now on the other side. I've had to sort of try and pick up some game trails as I've gone because the trail just vanished. So now I'm on these sort of quite steep slopes, just seen the klipspringer, and I'm making my way down that way, just following game trails. Here's a small skull that I picked up along the trail. I think it belongs to a dussie. Some other names for them is rock rabbit, or the scientific name is a hyrax. Well, the ridge up behind me is the one I was on earlier, looking down on this dry plain. So I'll just swing you around and show you how dry the actual ground is. So you can see this is now looking north, and there's actually a bit of a game fence, and I saw some springbok behind this fence just now. It's so dry and arid, and how it supports any livestock at all is quite surprising. But you know, the Great Karoo extends out hundreds of miles from here, and it's all like this. Well, thank you to those of you who stuck it out to the end. I hope you enjoyed seeing something a little bit different, experiencing a different part of the world, and a part of the world that I'm, you know, quite fond of, and you know, grew up around these parts. And once again, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.